Chapter 13, Part 2 of The Voyage of the Beagle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Arrowit. The Voyage of the Beagle by Charles Darwin. Chapter 13, Part 2. Chiloe and Chonos Islands. December 10th. The yawl and whaleboat, with Mr. Sullivan, proceeded on their survey, but I remained on board the Beagle, which the next day left San Pedro for the southward. On the 13th we ran into an opening in the southern part of Guayatecas, or the Chonos archipelago, and it was fortunate we did so, for on the following day a storm, worthy of Tierra del Fuego, raged with great fury. White massive clouds were piled up against a dark blue sky, and across them black ragged sheets of vapour were rapidly driven. The successive mountain ranges appeared like dim shadows, and the setting sun cast on the woodland a yellow gleam, much like that produced by the flame of spirits of wine. The water was white with the flying spray, and the wind lulled and roared again through the rigging. It was an ominous, sublime scene. During a few minutes there was a bright rainbow, and it was curious to observe the effect of the spray, which being carried along the surface of the water, changed the ordinary semicircle into a circle, a band of prismatic colours being continued from both feet of the common arch across the bay, close to the vessel's side, thus forming a distorted, but very nearly entire ring. We stayed here 3 days. The weather continued bad, but this did not much signify, for the surface of the land in all these islands is all but impassable. The coast is so very rugged that to attempt to walk in that direction requires continued scrambling up and down over the sharp rocks of mica slate, and as for the woods, our faces, hands, and shin bones all bore witness to the maltreatment we received, in merely attempting to penetrate their forbidden recesses. December 18th. We stood out to sea. On the 20th we bade farewell to the south, and with a fair wind turned the ship's head northward. From Cape Tres Montes we sailed pleasantly along the lofty weather-beaten coast, which is remarkable for the bold outline of its hills, and the thick covering of forest even on the almost precipitous flanks. The next day a harbour was discovered, which, on this dangerous coast, might be of great service to a distressed vessel. It can easily be recognized by a hill 1600 feet high, which is even more perfectly conical than the famous Sugar Loaf at Rio de Janeiro. The next day, after anchoring, I succeeded in reaching the summit of this hill. It was a laborious undertaking, for the sides were so steep that in some parts it was necessary to use the trees as ladders. There were also several extensive brakes of the fuchsia, covered with its beautiful drooping flowers, but very difficult to crawl through. In these wild countries it gives much delight to gain the summit of any mountain. There is an indefinite expectation of seeing something very strange, which, however often it may be balked, never failed with me to recur on each successive attempt. Every one must know the feeling of triumph and pride which a grand view from a height communicates to the mind. In these little frequented countries there is also joined to it some vanity, that you perhaps are the first man who ever stood on this pinnacle or admired this view. A strong desire is always felt to ascertain whether any human being has previously visited an unfrequented spot. A bit of wood with a nail in it is picked up and studied as if it were covered with hieroglyphics. Possessed with this feeling, I was much interested by finding, on a wild part of the coast, a bed made of grass beneath a ledge of rock. Close by it there had been a fire, and the man had used an axe. The fire, bed, and situation showed the dexterity of an Indian, but he could scarcely have been an Indian, for the race is in this part extinct, owing to the Catholic desire of making at one blow Christians and slaves. I had at the time some misgivings that the solitary man who had made his bed on this wild spot must have been some poor shipwrecked sailor, who, in trying to travel up the coast, had here laid himself down for his dreary night. December 28th. The weather continued very bad, but it at last permitted us to proceed with the survey. The time hung heavy on our hands, as it always did when we were delayed from day to day by successive gales of wind. In the evening another harbour was discovered, where we anchored. Directly afterwards a man was seen waving a shirt, and a boat was sent which brought back 2 seamen. party of 6 had run away from an American whaling vessel, and had landed a little to the southward in a boat, which was shortly afterwards knocked to pieces by the surf. They had now been wandering up and down the coast for 15 months, without knowing which way to go, or where they were. What a singular piece of good fortune it was that this harbour was now discovered! Had it not been for this one chance, they might have wandered till they had grown old men, and at last have perished on this wild coast. Their sufferings had been very great, and one of their party had lost his life by falling from the cliffs. They were sometimes obliged to separate in search of food, and this explained the bed of the solitary man. Considering what they had undergone, I think they had kept a very good reckoning of time, for they had lost only 4 days. December 30th. We anchored in a snug little cove at the foot of some high hills, near the northern extremity of Tres Montes. After breakfast the next morning, a party ascended one of these mountains, which was 2400 feet high. The scenery was remarkable. The chief part of the range was composed of grand, solid, abrupt masses of granite, which appeared as if they had been coeval with the beginning of the world. The granite was capped with mica slate, and this in the lapse of ages had been worn into strange finger-shaped points. These two formations, thus differing in their outlines, agree in being almost destitute of vegetation. This barrenness had to our eyes a strange appearance, from having been so long accustomed to the sight of an almost universal forest of dark green trees. I took much delight in examining the structure of these mountains. The complicated and lofty ranges bore a noble aspect of durability, equally profitless, however, to man and to all other animals. Granite to the geologist is classic ground; from its widespread limits and its beautiful and compact texture, few rocks have been more anciently recognized. Granite has given rise, perhaps, to more discussion considering its origin than any other formation. We generally see it constituting the fundamental rock, and, however formed, we know it is the deepest layer in the crust of this globe to which man has penetrated. The limit of man's knowledge in any subject possesses a high interest, which is perhaps increased by its close neighbourhood to the realms of imagination. January 1st, 1835. The new year is ushered in with ceremonies proper to it in these regions. She lays out no false hopes. A heavy northwestern gale, with steady rain, bespeaks the rising year. Thank God we are not destined here to see the end of it, but hope then to be in the Pacific Ocean, where a blue sky tells one there is a heaven, a something beyond the clouds above our heads. The northwest winds prevailing for the next 4 days, we only managed to cross a great bay, and then anchored in another secure harbour. I accompanied the captain in a boat to the head of the deep creek. On the way, the number of seals which we saw was quite astonishing. Every bit of flat rock and parts of the beach were covered with them. They appeared to be of a loving disposition, and lay huddled together fast asleep, like so many pigs, but even pigs would have been ashamed of their dirt, and the foul smell which came from them. Each herd was watched by the patient but inauspicious eyes of the turkey buzzard. This disgusting bird, with its bald scarlet head, formed to wallow in putridity, is very common on the west coast, and their attendance on the seals shows on what they rely for their food. We found the water, probably only that of the surface, nearly fresh. This was caused by the number of torrents which, in the form of cascades, came tumbling over the broad granite mountains into the sea. The fresh water attracts the fish, and these bring many terns, gulls, and 2 kinds of cormorant. We saw also a pair of the beautiful black-necked swans, and several small sea otters, the fur of which is held in such high estimation. In returning, we were again amused by the impetuous manner in which the heap of seals, old and young, tumbled into the water as the boat passed. They did not remain long under water, but rising, followed us with outstretched necks, expressing great wonder and curiosity. 7th. Having run up the coast, we anchored near the northern end of the Chonos archipelago, in Low's harbour, where we remained a week. The islands were here, as in Chiloe, composed of a stratified, soft, littoral deposit, and the vegetation, in consequence, was beautifully luxuriant. The woods came down to the sea beach, just in the manner of an evergreen shrubbery over a gravel walk. We also enjoyed from the anchorage a splendid view of 4 great snowy cones of the Cordillera, including El Famoso Corcovado. The range itself had in this latitude so little height that few parts of it appeared above the tops of the neighbouring islets. We found here a party of 5 men from Calen, El Fin del Cristianidad, who had, most adventurously, crossed in their miserable boat canoe for the purpose of fishing the open space of sea which separates